by the next century would be characters on TV who look just like you. That there'll be a little box in your set that pastes your face onto some other body that's running around on the screen. And then you get to watch yourself on TV spouting political opinions and brand preferences. It could actually influence the way you live. I, of course, also want to talk about the human factors component of this technology. I was recently at a talk by Tim Johnson at PDI, and he said the two first rules of computer animation are the computer is your worst enemy, and the computer is your best friend. And that struggle, the fact that both of those are there, is at the heart of dealing with this technology. I believe it was a Navy chief named George Hoover who coined the word human engineer. He was doing cockpit designs, and he wanted a psychologist. They wouldn't hire him one. They would only hire engineers. So he said, well, I need a human engineer. I found someone who claimed that he would. I know that when I first got involved with human animation, it was at Rockwell. Greg was there. We were doing animations of astronauts performing tasks, and we actually had a couple of human factors engineers on staff who were helping us figure out things like, for a 5th to 95th percentile human, which is what NASA said the space stations should be able to deal with, how short or long are the arms and the joints and between the hip and the knee and so on. We had a program that would let us pick a percentile, like 47, and would generate a model of a person. And they also did verification of our reach, that we weren't having them go back 180 degrees and grab something and things along those lines. But things really shifted when we got to the interactive world. And I think the only pioneer I can recall in this area is Alan Funt. We did an awful lot of stuff with talking mailboxes and various pranks where he would sit there with a microphone and he was watching a television monitor, and he, just with his voice, would try to get people to buy into this fantasy that the mailbox was alive and wanted a friend. There's also a really nice little low-tech attraction at Knott's Berry Farm where children walk up to a jail, and there's a stuffed dummy sitting in the jail with a speaker inside it, and it talks. And these children will walk up to this dummy, and it calls them by name. And they're amazed. How did you know my name? And there's this Knott's Berry Farm employee down at the other end of the street that's watching for when kids tear away from their parents to go talk to the dummy. And then they walk up to the parents and say, what's your kid's name? Write it down, and they pass that note in to the person who's operating the dummy voice. Real low tech, real impressive for the kids. And whoever does that job must know an awful lot about the kind of things Alan Funt learned, which is how do you get people engaged when you have a very low bandwidth channel. More recently, there's been the KIT car at Universal Studios. I don't know if it's out here in Florida, but it's definitely in California. And I understand that Kristian actually operated a KIT car, and maybe he'll share with us some of the amazing things we learned from that. And of course, I packed this panel with people from the Adventurers Club because when I first visited there a few years ago, I realized that this was a great training ground for people to operate VActor systems. They don't actually have digitally animated characters, but they have remotely operated puppets, and they have to look at the crowd on a television monitor. In other words, they have a pretty low bandwidth channel, and they're still having to engage people. There's a particular event that often goes on in which the stone mask called Babylonia, who's only a head, no body, picks a man out of the crowd, and she gets him to do kind of a little dance for everyone. And she typically picks a really macho guy, too. And so it's the kind of guy who would not be predisposed to do a little dance with him. And she somehow got to bully or badger or flirt or cajole him into doing this with just a voice, some mechanical eyes, and a mechanical mouth. And Anne has had experience doing that, and 5 nights a week for years. So we're hoping that we can hear a little about the kind of things that are involved in that. And lastly, this is a real lastly, I want to talk about new applications for this technology. When the first VActor systems, trademark, were put together, the expectation was that the designers and builders would sell them. They would sell them to studios that were going to do cartoons. They would sell them to people who put on trade shows. And what they found is that they're hard to sell. The buyers are very nervous. They don't want to jump into a new technology without testing the waters. But there's a great interest in renting the equipment or just renting studio time to bring in a personality and hook them up to one of these systems and then record their little trip, and they get some visual feedback in the form of like a low-res cartoon image, and then they take a tape away, and later they can reanimate that same image using ray tracing or other high-resolution computation-intensive techniques and produce a much better cartoon from the same data. Something else that's happened is there's actually been a company set up to sell canned motion data. The assumption being that there are some low-budget cartoonists out there who don't want to take their own personality and digitize them. They just want some jumping or arm waving or some motion, and they'll just buy it off the rack. And thirdly, there's been some really incredible experiments done in the area of using this technology for pediatric psychiatry and dealing with children who are in medical rehabilitation. At Loma Linda University Medical Center, they took a VActor system out, and I think they did a bunch of different things, but the most impressive thing to me was they went to the cancer ward where kids who were bedridden who were being treated for cancer. And they would put a character like Mario up on the television screen in the hospital room, and the kid could talk on the phone to that character and interact with him. And they found that this had a tremendous effect on the psychological state of the children. They were incredibly elated by this experience. It was like a high point of their lives, practically. And this has very important therapeutic impact, because something else they've studied at Loma Linda is the impact of your emotional state on your immune system. And they found very definite correlations that happiness, glee, mirthful laughter all strengthen the immune system. And so we need to be doing things to get people into a good mood when they're healing. So that's about all I have to say. I wonder if I've used more than my allotted 10 minutes. No, I think I did just about right. I wanted to mention that if you actually want to rent a VActor system, there's a company called PLS Staging. You can call 1-800-4VActor and rent one for your event. The founder of deGraf, Warman. Are there any left? Maybe I should consult my notes. Brad's been doing this for 10 years. No, that's me. I'm sorry. Produced the world's first computer-generated character. I'm certain, hopefully he'll tell us about that. And has also directed the computer animation for Peter Gabriel's Grammy Award-winning video Steam. We have Kristian, Truelsen, Art Doheny, and Ann Herring from the Adventures Club. They've all worked doing characters at the club. Also, Kristian, who's on the end, has worked the Knight Rider car and acted in film, television, and commercials. And Art, who's sitting right there, has also had acting experience in television, stage, and industrial videos. And Ann has been doing audience participation performances at Epcot as well as at the Adventures Club, and is in the upcoming performance of Steel Magnolias in Jacksonville. So those of you who are local, be sure to go see her and write letters to the paper and say she was great. Then we also have Richard Cray, who's been a VActor operator at last year's SIGGRAPH for the SimGraphics booth, and has also acted on Broadway in The Mystery of Edwin Drood, which was an interactive play, how do I want to put this, was the first person, to our knowledge, to use an operatic singer's voice in a VActor system last year when he created a character called Dynamation Man, opera singer by day, and a superhero with an opera voice by day and lounge singer by night. So, I'll just go in order, it makes it easiest. Start with Brad.
I may not take 10 minutes. I have a tape that if we get a chance to show.
Oh yeah, at the end, we're all going to go across the street and borrow someone else's tape player. Not across the street, across the hall. And we've got about 24 minutes of video material, if I'm not mistaken, that is quite interesting, but we thought we'd do the talking first.
And my tape's about 10 minutes long. So
and we have another 14-minute tape from Richard, so that's 24 altogether.
And while I wouldn't mind taking credit for doing the first computer-generated character, I can't quite claim that. Michael Warman and I did the first live computer-generated character. Michael Thompson did that in '88. And actually, the one person that I don't know if I heard mentioned in your discussion there, but Jim Henson really, I think, deserves a lot of credit in really pioneering this stuff. Because when we were at Digital Productions, it was before the days when you could do real-time shaded graphics. So that kind of meant that it really didn't go anywhere. But we did a project with the Henson people. I guess it was '86 or '87, where we digitized Kermit and attached him to one of their Waldos, and were able to animate him on an IMI vector system. And that's the first instance I know of where we had real-time devices attached to a computer display that was a character. It wasn't until about a year and a half later when we did Mike the Talking Head, where we actually had shaded graphics that came out of the SGI 4D systems. And then it's going on from there. It's actually it's amazing to me that it's taken as long as it has to do anything really compelling with it. 5 years is a long time in this business, and there really haven't been. I mean, well, for me, what I've done recently is moved to Colossal Pictures and brought performance animation with me. Eric Gregory and I developed a system that after my old company, deGraf, shut down, a second-generation performance animation system called Alive. And we brought that to Colossal, and the really liberating thing about that was really not so much the technology, but hooking into a creative community that was grounded in the creation of characters. And so we got to work with people who create characters all the time. And it just happened that right when we started, about a year and a half ago, we started working with the Cartoon Network to do a character for them called Moxie. It ended up being called Moxie. It took us a while to arrive at who the character was. And he's in his second year now. We're doing it. We did 16 45-second little cartoons. He has his own show where he does kind of a Beavis and Butthead number where he introduces cartoons. And we also did a live show on to 75 million homes straight from the back of our computer over TBS, TNT, Cartoon Network. Anyway, that was pretty scary. But it's still kind of in its infancy. Live shows for me are really, really dicey because the hardware to do a full body, rich character still isn't there as far as I'm aware of. I mean, I just went to Epcot to see the Aladdin show, and basically every machine that anybody can interact with is a fully loaded Onyx 8 with 3 reality engine boards, and I mean at least $400,000 worth of hardware. And even then, the frame rate's not really there. So I think we're still another generation away from being really able to do high-quality live stuff. We use it for doing large amounts of animation to be as high quality as possible. So we do what you were talking about. We use it as a production tool that allows us to generate, minutes of animation in a day as opposed to over several months. As far as one of the other motion capture to me is a tool. I mean, it's becoming really commonplace. There's a lot of systems out there for capturing motion. That's not a hard problem. Anybody with any brains can figure out how to take real-time devices and attach them to channel capturing software and play it back on an animation system. What's really tricky is what's important is what you do with it creatively. What are your characters like? What are the stories you're telling? What are you doing to make use of it to make people laugh or evoke emotion or whatever? So I mean, I think that's what's great about it is that it's going to get in the hands of a lot of people, and it's just there's a huge open field there for three-dimensional characters that really that are not limited by how long it takes you to produce them. They're limited only by the stories being told. The other big area that I think is really interesting is what I call autonomous characters, where you're not just capturing motion, but you're giving the character some set of behavior that is inherent in the way the character is built. Moxie, for instance, has a lot of sort of autonomous nervous system kind of things that the animators don't have to deal with at all. He blinks automatically, and his feet, when they get near the ground, the toes bend if they're within a particular angle, so you have this sense of being planted on the ground. What else? There's a whole bunch of his ears kind of do this kind of wobble that kind of follows his head, so it doesn't look like a pair of antlers that are stuck to his head. A lot of subtle things that really just add a lot to the believability and the life of the character that isn't just capturing a bunch of motion or capturing a mouth opening and closing or whatever. But also I think that if you take that idea a little bit farther and get it a little up from just autonomous nervous system kind of things to being behaviors that deal with the environment they're in or interactions with other characters, whether they're live, whether they're incarnations of real people or whether they're just autonomous characters themselves, that becomes really interesting and leads into the whole population of virtual reality of you know, in virtual reality, if it doesn't have characters there, it's pretty boring. What are the characters doing? They're either being the incarnations of people who are participating, or they're autonomous characters in and of themselves. I think that's really going to be a big, as that gets into the gaming and multiplayer environments that are going to be possible in the next few years. I think that gets pretty interesting. As far as people being put out of work, you know, I just don't see it. I've been doing attempts at simulating human beings ever since, I guess, TRW was the first one we did some production. It's a pain in the ass. It's something I hate doing. And some people might want to do it, and it's a challenge, and you know, when people will get better and better and better at it, and yeah, there will be computer-generated characters that are very convincing as human beings. So what? You know, I'm much more interested in creating fantasy characters, cartoons. You know, the whole thing of what you call it, Trumpolography. That's even a completely different direction. That's all 2D stuff. And when I started hearing Steven Spielberg say that in a few years, you know, there were going to be simulations of actors that were, you know, having Bogey do things he never did, I thought, what a joke. You know, we're decades away from that. But I was thinking 3D. I wasn't thinking 2D. And Greenberg has done a great job of you know, having Paula Abdul, you know, talk to Cary Grant. But I just think of that as trick photography. I mean, it's not really. It has nothing to do with performance animation. And yeah, I think actually it really depends on how much people are interested in seeing more animated material. Animation has been limited by production capacity, and always has been. And I think that's the one thing that's going to change, is that production capacity is going to be wide open. When these tools are another generation beyond, basically anybody who has a PC and, you know, a few $1,000s of software and hardware will be able to animate characters in real time. But anybody who has a video camera can make films now too, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's, you know, an orders of magnitude more films that people want to watch. So I think there will be a certain amount of displacement of traditional animation into 3D animation. I don't think it's going to put any actors out of business. If anything, it's going to give actors more of different ways of applying their trade. You won't see them as much, and hear them and see their motions. Anyway. Yep.
Hi, I'm Art. Talk to you from, I guess, from my experience as an actor's point of view. Myself and Ann and Kristian work at the Adventures Club, and what we do is interactive entertainment, interactive improvisation. We manipulate animatronic characters. We have the advantage of seeing the guests and reacting with them without them seeing us. We also portray live characters. We don't just stand behind the scenes. We portray different characters every night throughout the club that live in the club. So we have a very personal interaction with the guests. I think we've all been there about 5 years now. And it's been really a great learning experience. A lot more than I would have learned in my training. What's exciting to watch, kind of from the sidelines, I'm very much interested in computers, but to watch the technology, as we're saying, starting to take off. The concern isn't for lack of or losing of jobs. The concern is for, like, well, how do you get into that? Here I am, you know, I can do this. Where are you going to do this at? How can you use me? And I think right now, it's got a long way to go. I'm surprised it hasn't picked up in theme parks as much as I would think it would. I mean, it just seems like something that they would love to have. Not necessarily for the animation. That's a total other side. I'm speaking as for the entertainment value, conventions and online kiosks while people are waiting for 45 minutes to 2 hours to ride, you know, 90-second ride. You know, I find that very surprising. I hope it picks up. I hope that the other uses for it do also. I understand the whole thing of animation that you're talking out of my field and we'll get to that. But as far as live entertainment, it's there. I think it needs some time to really kick in, and we as actors, there's a whole field of actors here and in most any major city that are qualified actors. And I think it's important in something like this you get someone who is qualified, who is trained. The reason being you get somebody back there who isn't, and ends up to be insulting, funny, or whatever. So there's a talent. Really, as far as my insights right now, that's about it. I mean, you need us, but I'm not doing that. But it's two pools of talent: the animators, then there's the technology, then there's the actors, and it's definitely a technology that can bring those together and make the best of all of them.
I'm going to sit. That's okay. I'm more secure. I'm virtually computer illiterate, so excuse my vocabulary if I use the wrong terms or something, just to understand I'm coming from an actor point of view. First of all, speaking about what we do at the club, Babylonia, to elaborate a little more, is a stone mask that is mounted on the wall that's about 5 feet tall and 4 feet wide. And her mouth opens, just very basically open and shut, and her eyes move, and she can smoke. And we sit there up a ladder behind her, right behind her, and look at a black and white monitor of the room in front of us, and open and shut her mouth with our legs and move her eyes with a U-bar kind of thing that does that. And we have a mic, a headset. What's interesting about, several things are interesting about Babylonia. One of them, and I guess about any of the puppets, is that it is liberating. When I first started working in the club and didn't have as much improvisational experience as some of the other folks, I found the quickest thing to get was Babylonia, because you're not right out there being looked at. You have, in effect, a mask that you can hide behind that is bigger and thicker than any character costume you could put on. And so it gives you certain liberties. And strangely enough, guests, the public, are more accessible sometimes when they're dealing with a puppet or a mask. They don't feel as threatened. You're not in their personal space because they know you can't come off the wall at them. And so they're often more likely to do things that, were I to walk up as, say, the president of the club in a dress and say, would you bump and grind for me, they might not do it as quickly as if I smoked at them with Babylonia and said in a character voice, all right, I want, then they do it. God knows why, thank God they do. So that's one thing, that it's a liberating experience for both the actor and the audience member. The other thing I've found that sometimes Babylonia can get things going with a group on her own, but very often it's helpful to have another actor facilitator out there, and that's something that might evolve in your work, that you might find the need to have an MC, if you will, or a go-between who can act as a liaison between the audience and the puppet. Not that they can't hear them, but to probe and to generate and to act maybe as a straight man. Very often, whoever the other actor is that's down there becomes a straight man to the puppet's Gracie Allen. And then that's a whole other dynamic. Then you have two creative minds bouncing off of each other, and the audience is pulled in as needed. So that I think is real helpful. The other thing is the atmosphere in which it all takes place. We're very lucky at the club that we have a very rich, just a plethora of stuff to draw from in our atmosphere. We are in a building that is a self-contained atmosphere. It all takes place in 1937. Everything is, most things are in sync with that period. And so it's a safe atmosphere in which to do that. I would think it would be a little more difficult to do that kind of work, let's say, in a convention room, where all of a sudden you're asked to suspend your disbelief and talk to this person who happens to, this puppet that happens to be on a wall where a painting used to be, you know. That might be a little trickier, and take some pre-show stuff or something to get you to buy into that. We have it very easy at the club. People walk in and they immediately know they are not in the real world or in real time. They don't always know where they are, but they know they're not in the real world. And that helps us a lot. Any other questions you have about that? Oh, and the other thing that I don't think we think about very often at the club as being a puppet or in this category, but really is our organ, who we call fingers. And the theory is that the organist was playing and fell through the organ loft. From the organ loft, the organ fell on him. I don't know, he's dead, he's gone. Anyway, he possesses the organ, and the organ plays by itself. The organ doesn't talk verbally, but we can interact with the organ and ask it questions, and it'll musically respond to us because there is a live accompanist behind a wall who can watch us to a certain extent. So that, too, is a puppet, really, even though it's not a human-looking or sounding puppet. As far as the potential of this goes, I said to Art and Kristian before we started, I said, well, I'm kind of going to play bad cop here. I decided, since somebody said. I am a little concerned about, I am very concerned about the potential of it and will it replace actors. I'm happy to hear you say that it's a pain in the ass to do, frankly. I get that it's going to open up a whole field of jobs for us in where I see it immediately is in business theater, convention work, that kind of thing, theme park, and that's wonderful. It's going to be interesting to see how the unions deal with that. But I am concerned, and maybe this isn't the specific technology you're talking about, but it certainly could be an offspring, about the idea of replacing somebody's face with someone else's on film. And what comes to mind immediately is Forrest Gump and Gary Sinise being miraculously amputated at the knee, which you probably know he isn't. While I can sit and say, oh, that's fascinating that they can do that, and I applaud the technology, it does concern me that there are challenge actors out there who maybe aren't getting a shot because they're not Prince Steppenwolf and they're not Gary Sinise, and even though they could probably chew the scenery just as well as he, and they don't have legs, you know, they're not going to get a chance at that. Taken to the nth degree, it concerns me that we could get to the point of, let's say, we want to use a black actor, but he's a little too black. So, you know, we change that a little bit. Or we want to use an actor doing a dialect, but Brooke Shields just can't get the Russian dialect quite well enough. So we have somebody dub it in, and we electronically manipulate her mouth to make it, you know. This all concerns me because these are things that we take years to study. Oh, not race, but I mean, you know, techniques are things that we take years to study and perfect. And it does concern me that could be dismissed. I don't think it's going to go that way, but I think we should be aware that it's a potential. And to wrap up, I guess, in all of this, I have to hope that audiences in general will always yearn for live performance. It was probably a concern when film was first invented that stage actors all of a sudden thought, oh God, are we going to be displaced? Why would they need us? And then television came in and film said, well, why do they need to go out of their home? They can see it at TV. There will always be a concern in my mind that we as humans crave live performance. And I think we will, but it'll never generate as much money as this kind of stuff can because it can't hit as many people at once. That's just the reality. That's the nature of the beast. But, you know, so far we're surviving. But it's tough out there to find a market for what we are trained to do. Sometimes. So that's my concern, and I just want it to be out there. Worry about it. That's all. With that.
Well, I sort of prepared videotape for my presentation. So we'll see that later. About a year ago, my eyes were sort of open to all of this for the first time. I was asked by Steve Tice to actually stand in for someone on his break to work the VActor system for some graphics at SIGGRAPH last year. And I've been performing since I was 9 years old as a singer, and when I was a kid I played with marionette puppets, my own puppet theater in the attic and all this. And so the first time that I got into the body and the Waldo and all that and saw this thing moving like I was moving, it just really, really took me. And I was petrified because it was the first time I'd ever had to perform without a script. And I mean, I went into Steve's office and sang a few bars of Largo Factotum or whatever, and he said, okay, come and do this. And you know, I tried to create this character and sort of be this nice person when people would walk up. But what happened to me at that point was that I saw this whole new wave. I mean, as an actor who was totally ignorant of virtual reality, computer animation, and all the potential for it. You know, between the times that I was in the system, I'd run over and put on an HMD and see what that was all about, or go see some, you know, high definition 3D computer animation. I was like, well, I want to sing here. I want to sing in this environment. You know? So it sort of comes full circle for me to be back here, and I actually came back to SIGGRAPH because I had too much fun at all the parties last year. So, but I realized over this past year I've met Brenda Laurel and Mort Heilig and Myron Kruger, and I got to speak with them, and I was at the SAG gathering they had at the Hilton at Universal Studios for all the heads of the major actors equity and SAG and equity Britain and all that. I was so surprised at how ignorant everyone was about all the issues involved with the unions and how much I knew in the sense of my own education. And that I in a way was there as a teacher, and I'm real excited about this, and I think I had maybe 10 hours of experience in the system, and it was enough to propel me through a year of trying to educate myself on the significance of having that little bit of time in the system. I think it's a great future, especially for live performance animation. It would be wonderful in the future when the technology develops that it could be a pure art form, and that the performing artist would have control over the entire performance, in the sense also the design of the character. You know. But I have a little video that I put together. I think a year ago I'd never put a mouse in my hand. Just then I've learned to use a computer sort of, and I've learned to use a nonlinear editing system. And like you say, anybody can make a little video or a film, and I did. And hopefully we'll see it later.
In setting up this discussion group, there was the talk of actually a couple of different things. One of them being the whole VActor system and how it relates to being interactive as an actor, as a technology with a group of people that you call your audience. And it also dealt with the threat of replacing live actors strictly with technology. Seems to me this threat has existed for a long, long time. As Anne said, when movies came along, stage actors worried. There's a story, perhaps apocryphal, about vaudevillian screen performers doing a lot of slapstick when they saw animated cartoons in the 30s where a big rock falls on an animated character who's squashed flat, the rock rolls off, the character walks around flat and then pops up again. And one of these vaudevillians turns to the other and says, "We're out of work because we can never do that. We can never do that physical effect." And yet, they exist. They still exist today. Witness Home Alone and the sort of physical stuff that goes on in there, or the entire series of Pink Panther movies. So there's always a threat, and then there's always a rebound. Unfortunately, the pendulum continues to swing in the threatening direction. It just happens to go a lot slower than the alarmists would have us think. On the other hand, it does move. For example, in the film Gandhi, they brought together thousands of people for the funeral scene. When George Lucas was doing the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, he didn't bring together thousands of extras. He brought together a few dozen and duplicated filming. So there were thousands of people who did not get work. So there is something going on. Whether the VActor technology is part of that threat to the livelihood of the actor may be another matter entirely, because it seems to rely so heavily on interaction. Now, I would submit to you that entertainment generally involves interaction, whether we really think of it or not. The most involving film and television is just that, involving. It means that you, as a watcher of the piece, are somehow moved, are somehow connected so deeply to what you're watching that you're not standing outside of it, you're drawn into it. And so there's an amount of interaction. The wonderful thing about being a stage performer is that the interaction is so much more apparent. You get a tactile sense from the audience that obviously, as a film actor, if I do something for television, maybe I'll hear a chuckle from somebody behind the camera, but that's the most I can hope for until they sweeten the soundtrack and put in all the laughs so that the kids watching television will know this was supposed to be a joke. But on stage, you know if something works or not. And it's not just comedy. You can feel if there's emotions running in the room as well. At the Adventurers Club, we take it even a step further because we're not separated from the audience by a podium or by a stage or footlights. We are right there, sitting next to you on the next seat and talking with you and demanding a response from you, verbally as well as emotionally. So we've sort of run the spectrum, those of us that have worked as actors. It's interesting in this group, I think this is why Alan chose some of us, because we haven't just worked in a situation that's been removed from our audience. Most of us have worked in a way that has depended on the audience for more than just applause. The fact that Richard was in Edwin Drood, that demanded that the audience decide how the piece ends, something like that. The kit car that I worked with is another very low technology example. For those of you that dared to watch the show Knight Rider, it involved a car with a supercomputer and they could think and converse and all that sort of thing. So they have a model of this car at Universal Studios. The children can go and sit in the car and the car will talk to them. Basically, this doesn't even involve the technology that we have at the club of a cheesy camera pointed at the crowd with bad resolution, so you can't be sure if it's a man or a woman you're talking to. I was placed 50, 75 feet away from the car in a building with little slots in the wall, obscured partially behind trees. You could peer through and say, okay, who's getting into the car now? Then you had the headset, and you had a few controls. You could make the windows roll up or down, or the headlights come on. And when you talked, the little light would blink on the dashboard. And you'd ask the kids if they had any questions for you. And they'd say, where's Michael, the driver of the car? Of course, he's not there. He's on assignment. So this is about as cheesy interaction as you can get, and yet they would line up. They would line up and they'd wait a good long time to sit in the car and pretend they're pushing buttons and making things happen. And the same thing, I imagine, is going to remain true because of a combination of fascination with technology. How do they do that? And we hope, because the person working the technology as an actor has something to offer. And this is why Art said, I hope you hire actors to do this, because it reflects on the technology itself. If the person running the technology has no more to say than, hi, how you doing, where you from, then the interest in this interaction diminishes and goes down fast. But if you have something interesting to say, then people will remain there. I think if any of you have been to Epcot, at the end of the transportation pavilion, there's a little thing called Bird and Robot or something. It's down in after you get off the ride, there's a bunch of display areas. And they have a little mechanical toucan with a cigar in his mouth and a robot. And the toucan says a bunch of funny things, and the robot does a bunch of funny things. And I've watched people come in and look at it and go, oh, wow, look at how they're moving, and never listen to a word they're saying, and then move on. And the reason is, why should they listen? Because it's all recorded. And unless someone is really in the mood to say, let me see your show, they will move on. At the Adventurers Club, we find the same thing. If Babylonia starts talking, people very often think, this is a Disney audio animatronic. And we can look at it and say, oh, look, we have a mask on the wall that talks. But as soon as they pick someone in the crowd and say, yeah, you in the Canada shirt, then, what? Suddenly the crowd is drawn into it because they have become personally involved. Now they have a stake in the performance and in the entertainment. If you remove the actor from any of this technology, then you lose the immediacy, you lose the connection with your crowd, and all you have is a fascination in the technology. And I would like to think that only goes so far. So the best of both worlds is obviously something that is pretty whiz-bang, but then holds your interest because somebody's behind that technology, making it important to the audience.
Well, the next phase here then will be to go across the hall to the wavefront room where we are going to scan the use of their monitor and tape player and see some of this video that we have prepared. And then to actually get some interaction with the technology, I just found out before walking in here that Dave Warner of Loma Linda got PLS to loan him a VActor system, and something I would never have done. He packed a van full of equipment and summer students and had them drive it out here from California while he was there. And it actually arrived in one piece. And he got it set up over in SIGGRAPH, even though he's not supposed to be there. And so after this is over, any of us who care to go into further explorations can go over to the edge, SIGGRAPH region in the south end of the hall, and actually play with a VActor system. But first, let's convene and look at some video. Graphics and animation and computer interface design, that's when the golden age is going to come. And I'm firmly convinced of that. Thank you all for coming, and I'd like to give a big hand for those of us who are on the panel who are still here. And be sure to go over to the SIGGRAPH and play with real VActor systems.
Oh.